I would like to call forward Ms. Jane Coffin from ISOC. Christian O'Flaherty from ISOC as well. Bevil Wooding, PCH. And Kurleigh Prescod from Columbus Communications. Our next session is entitled IXPs Implementation, Experiences, and Challenges Globally and in LAC-region. We have heard a lot about IXPs. We have been discussing IXPs, globally. Everybody's talking about IXPs, Internet Exchange Points. And we would like to get a better understanding with respect to what is taking place on the global scale, regionally, and also here in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have Ms. Jane Coffin from Internet Society. She has been working globally with respect to a lot of IXP projects, helping stakeholders to implement IXPs, and also developing an IXP toolkit. So I would like to ask her to come and share with us what has been done globally in this regard, and then we will continue with the other presenters, and finally we will have some discussions. So I would like to ask Jane, please come and share with us what you have been doing so far.
And I will only take about 5 to 6 minutes because we want to leave lots of time for the other presenters to give you a regional, Caribbean, and a very local perspective. So very briefly, many of you know what the role of Internet Exchange Points is, but we just wanted to give a quick overview. They're a well-recognized and vital part of an Internet ecosystem, and they're essential for facilitating a robust ICT sector. Our primary role of an IXP is to keep local traffic local, and what we mean by that is exchange of local traffic, building national IXPs. This does not mean that you don't bring in regional and international cables and other providers as well. This is an important point that's come up recently in a debate about national versus regional IXPs. IXPs can also help improve the quality of service and drive demand. They can create a convenient hub for attracting key internet infrastructure, and they can act as a catalyst for overall internet development, and we mean part of the ecosystem of the human, the technical, and the governance infrastructures. This is a snapshot from telegeography of IXPs around the world. I looked this morning on EuroIX's website, and you'll see a snapshot here in a few slides. There are over 490 IXPs now around the world, so this is not new. Some of them go back as far as 16 to 20 years. It depends on the country. But we just wanted to give you sort of this global picture. IXPs by region. You can take probably a stronger look at this online. It's hard to read some of this. But you can see from EuroX's snapshots this morning about 462 globally, 193 in Europe, 99 in North America, 51 known in the LAC-region, 89 known in Asia Pacific, and there's an AFIX map here where there are about 30 in Africa now. We've done a lot of work across the regions with the teams, everyone from Shernan to Sebastian to Christian, colleagues of ours in Africa, Asia, Europe, everywhere. Part of the development model that we're seeing that is so effective is the technical governance and human infrastructure coalescing together to do the work. The technology doesn't need to be expensive to be effective. Governance is typically not-for-profit models, neutral and transparent, and member-driven models. Human, from the people side, it's important to grow your technical community, and IXPs are one way to do that. Also helps improve traffic management and efficiencies. The guys will talk more about that in a minute. From a global perspective, ISOC has teams around the world, but we do nothing without partners. People like Bevil from PCH, Kurleigh, who's working with Bevil here, they partner together, others. NSRC, the Network Startup Resource Center. The regional internet registries are key people. Kevin's team at LACNIC, we do lots of training with them, and Christian will speak more about that, I think. So everything is done together, but we want to give you an idea that there is this global perspective out there of the importance of the development of IXPs. They're not the magic bullet, they're not the only thing, but they're a critical part of the internet ecosystem and critical for economic development. So some of our partners, as I mentioned before, and some of the different teams around the world that are coming together. There's AFIX, which is the African Internet Exchange Association, APIX in Asia Pacific, EuroIX, Europe, LAC-IX, Latin America and the Caribbean, and the IXF Federation. And that's something where all of these IX associations are agreeing to work together more closely to exchange best practices, work together, and improve IX development and leveling up. I've noted the RIRs, PCH, and SRC, some of our partners. I want to give a note out to PeeringDB, which if you're an IXP, it's important that you put your data in PeeringDB. It's a free online resource where a lot of companies and peers come together to put their information out there so they know that you exist. It's a good place to look for data. PeeringDB will soon be merging some of their databases with EuroIX, so they'll have a super database of autonomous system numbers, IXPs, different best practices and information, and different info about IXPs and networks. Telegeography as well is one of the key different sources, as well as PCH. Creating the enabling environment for the internet. IXPs help do some of this. They do help provide a more competitive environment, particularly if smaller ISPs can come together and peer at the IX. We look at this from a holistic perspective, and again, the enabling environment is something that we're very keen to work with governments on, because governments are a key part of that environment. So the Internet Exchange Points can be a catalyst for bringing certain people together, but there are other aspects of the environment that government can help with, from local loop unbundling, backhaul from the submarine cable landing station, IP transit interconnection. We just heard about some of the interconnection issues this morning a little bit between mobile providers, but it also helps promote the private sector investment and provide some regulatory certainty with respect to how things work, who's working with whom, and it gives people a chance to see who's on your network or not. I'm going to flip through a little bit of some of these best practices, but the guys are going to talk about this more. You want to build a community of trust. Sustainability and local champions are key for that. This can't be, I can't emphasize this enough. We often say that building an IXP is 80% human infrastructure and 20% technical. I've recently heard from a colleague, Philip Smith, who's a BGP expert and a routing guy extraordinaire. It's 95% human and 5% technical. That's Philip's perspective now. So working with local governments to inform, it's key that you work with your local community because you know it best. Trust and independence of the IXP can also be facilitated by giving a government a heads up in the beginning. Neutrality, location, and relationships, this is your credibility factor, and that will be discussed later. Location, neutral, good power, power backup, accessibility. This is so people can come in, fix their gear, help fix cross connects and imports, and bring in your own fiber. I think you've got that here in Trinidad. Decision-making and governance, this is the human infrastructure. This grows as the IXP goes from startup phase to more developed phase to more mature phase. You never start off at the top, right? You're going to start off at working through the technical infrastructure and human pieces to start. Technical practice and tech community. Think of this as a way to increase your technical infrastructure. It's better for the country. Leveling up, planning, business plan, tech upgrade, staff outreach. This is what we mean from startup to next level to next level. There's lots more from the regional side of things. And Christian will speak about the regional side. Bevil's going to come in on the Caribbean. And Trinidad will be Kurleigh.
Thank you, Jane. So we'd like to invite Christian O'Flaherty to highlight Latin America IXP development.
Should I move? Okay. Thank you. So I'm not going to use slides now. I'm just going to describe the current situation and why we are working so hard to improve the interconnections. If you remember from my presentation yesterday, the internet is built interconnecting networks. That's why the internet, it's called the internet, because we want to interconnect those networks, and improving those interconnections, the amount of networks that a packet has to go through, it's going to be reduced. if we only have a few interconnections, each packet we send to the network should go to many, many different equipment and networks in order to reach the other end. That will be inefficient and costly because that packet will require a lot of infrastructure and it's going to use a lot of capacity on many different links and equipment. So if we have more interconnections, those packets will go through a reduced amount of networks. If we are able to interconnect all the networks in the internet, the packets will just to traverse a couple of networks. That's something that it will not happen because we are not able to interconnect every single network with each other. So what we have to do is to create as many interconnections as possible, or create the conditions to have as many interconnections as possible. And those interconnections are going to improve the quality in many ways. If the packet go to the other end in a shorter path, it's going to take less time, so the delay is going to be reduced. It's measured in milliseconds. But each component, it's also going to be improved. If you remember how the resolution process works on the DNS, you remember yesterday I explained that you had to send a query with the name you are looking for, and then you receive an answer that server do not have that answer, but knows what server can provide the answer. Then you send another query to a different server. So for each name that you use on the internet, there's a lot of packet going back and forth to different servers. And if you've got a lot of delay to reach those servers, then the resolution process is going to take a lot of time. If you are able to improve the interconnection and reduce the delay in order to reach those servers, then the resolution process is faster and the experience for the user is much better, much faster. So, for example, if you are able to install a root server on the IXP, do you remember the root servers are those that where you start the resolution process? If you can install one of those root servers on an IXP, all that the process that I described yesterday, it's going to be in the order of a few milliseconds instead of the order of several seconds, which would be the case if you don't have a root server installed in your country. So there are several benefits, and those benefits, if we think about the speeds that were presented in the previous presentation on broadband speeds of the order of 10 megs or so, improving those interconnections are going to are going to impact a lot of much more because of the higher speeds. If you've got very low speed connections and there are no good interconnections, you're not going to see much difference because anyway it's going to take a lot of time. But as speeds are improved on our homes, on our internet connections, then those bottlenecks or those high delays are going to impact. So if we are able to reduce the latency for the resolution process, for the contacting the content providers and all that stuff, then the experience for the user it's improved a lot. So how can we make that happen? How can we create the conditions? And this is where the work on IXPs or what it makes our work on IXP so relevant. There are different organizations that are working with us trying to create those conditions that helps internet development. ISOC is one of them, PCH is another one, LAC-region is another one. We are trying to promote with workshops in region. We are trying to provide equipment for the IXPs in order to grow when they are on the early stages or in order to start working when they are not yet there. And what are the different characteristics of those IXPs? Sometimes when a government realizes all the benefits that IXPs has, they want to think bigger and have like regional IXPs or global IXPs or something that can scale. And that's usually not the case. IXPs are something that should be agreed among the local communities. And eventually, if they want to grow, that would be in the Caribbean, if they want to have bigger scope, it should be something natural. It should be a network provider with a global or a Caribbean network that is willing to connect to the IXP that you've got in your country and is willing to announce all the prefixes they've got in other islands, and naturally it's going to become a regional IXP. But it's not something that you can put a label on there and mandate that it should be a regional IXP. That's not the case. And there are very, very big IXPs, like in Brazil, and very successful IXPs that are only regional in the city where they are deployed, or sometimes in the country where they are, like the one in São Paulo. It's the biggest in the region. And they do not try to be a regional IXP. They're not trying to increase the scope or the coverage of the IXP. So they are the biggest, although they are just a national IXP. And there are other cases, like in Argentina, where the conditions, because they've got neighboring countries like Uruguay or Chile, with providers that wanted to connect to the IX in Buenos Aires, for example, that became regional, but because it was something that wanted the providers that were in neighboring countries, and not because themselves wanted to make a regional IX by itself. So when the regional part it's included in the planning of the IX, it's usually not what it's going to make the change. The change or the effect and the impact, it's going to be a natural condition that was enabled by the members of the IX when they let other networks to connect, when they let the scope of the announcements to spread on the region and things like that. Something that it's an evolution instead of a imposed or planned at the beginning. So there are several cases in the region where there are many successful IXPs, some of them on local impact on their city, some of them with national impact, as I said, in Brazil, the biggest one, and with many different models. So there's no single success case that can be applied for every country. You have agreed on a model that suits for Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm sure it's going to be a success, and it's completely different to the models that were chosen on other countries, and that's perfect because each country has its own conditions, and eventually you can learn and cooperate with other IXs when you are growing, because you may experience things that have already happened in our country. So for that, there's an organization that it's called LAC-IX, which is the IXP Association for the region, where they discuss and share experiences and talk about cases that they usually have in common, and they agree on plans, but keeping in mind that each of them has a different model, a different member condition to join the IX and things like that. And that's something that that's how it has to be. So fortunately in the region nowadays, we can say that most of the country has its own IXP. It's not the case for the Caribbean. The Caribbean is still growing. Bevil is doing a great job, and he's probably going to describe that. And as I said, the cooperation within the region, it's on the IXP association, but in order to discuss common problems and not in order to build a regional IX for regional traffic. That part is something that comes by itself, yes, and it's not needed now. So, thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Next presenter is Bevil Wooding. I think for sure Bevil could be considered an internet evangelist here in the Caribbean. I think the first time I met Bevil, I think like 9 years ago, and I used to work at a regulator in the Netherlands, Antilles back then. So he was already talking about IXPs. So I think that's why I'm calling him an internet evangelist in the Caribbean. So Bevil will be explaining to us a bit what is going on in the Caribbean with respect to ISP development. Bevil.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Actually, when I met Shuna, it was at an IXP, Internet Exchange Point presentation in Curacao that then resulted in the establishment of the Curacao Exchange, Open Caribbean IX, which is now one of the, in terms of traffic move, one of the larger exchanges in the Caribbean. For a number of people, though, when this campaign to proliferate Internet exchange points in the region began, there were a number of opponents who were arguing things like, well, the region is too small. Actually, some of them are in the room. The region is too small. The markets don't have the kind of traffic that will justify establishing exchange points, and so on. But then there were a few who understood that if we had to move to a place where the Caribbean had the infrastructure required to support its IT or ICT-related development goals, then there had to be a different kind of attention put upon the location of critical internet infrastructure within country. Now, as Christian said, IXPs are not necessarily a national thing per se. You can have multiple IXPs in a country. But where you have no IXPs, you do have a gaping hole in the ability or capacity of the country to really leverage its internet-related development plans. And so the campaign began. And the thing that really gave it momentum was shifting the discussion away from a simple telecommunications ISP conversation toward a larger social conversation. What exactly are we trying to do with regard to technology, and what are we trying to do specifically as it relates to internet technology? If there's going to be increasing reliance on things like distance education, e-government, cybersecurity, and so on, then there has to be some kind of local investment in local infrastructure to support these things. And that was where the movement really began in earnest, as a conversation that widened to include governments, private sector, academia, and the ISPs about what does the Caribbean need as it relates to internet infrastructure. And the simple basic position was this: investment in local technology requires investment in local infrastructure. You can't talk cellular networks and cellular growth without talking antennas and towers and so on. In the same way, you can't talk internet growth without talking internet exchange points, root servers, and so on. And a lot of these terms, I'm sure you'll all agree, a lot of these terms have no bearing, meaning, or significance to most people in the public. People just want to know that they have a faster internet. They want to know that they have the kind of service that allows them to do the things that they consider to be their online priorities. I want to use Facebook. I want to use YouTube. Or, in the case of some organizations, I just want to be more competitive in terms of how my products get out to market. And so by shifting it into that social element, the realization or the epiphany that came about was that basic connectivity just not cutting it, one. And two, we can't wait on the service providers to dictate the pace of how we invest in infrastructure. When the definition of an internet exchange point was made across the region, most governments were like, really? Why don't we have this again? Is it really that easy? Is it that affordable? If so, how come there aren't more in the region? Surely there is something missing in this story about the IXPs being the foundation stone of the internet economy. And the truth is there was nothing missing. The internet service providers understood the inefficiency of sending traffic much further than it had to go, but the economics of sending it that way was not a pressing concern to them. And so once you took the economics out of the equation for the IXPs or internet exchange points was not exactly top of the priority list in terms of things to do. And so we had to bring it back into the priority list by making it a national development agenda. If Trinidad and Tobago has, for example, an ICT plan, and the ICT plan depends on increasing information services that depend on the internet, then what's the infrastructure to support it? How are we going to resolve those investments in applications and content and services if, in the event of a cable cut, we no longer have access to what should be local services? And these were a number of the things that the IX, net exchange points, address very directly. And then the other thing that happened more recently that caused a whole new wave of attention around exchanges was the Snowden revelations. Okay, so that traffic that's making its way up to New York and to Miami and to London unnecessarily. Oh, you mean that can be interrogated at will by foreign governments without any say-so, and we're sending it there? And that caused a number of people to become very uncomfortable with the inefficiency. So no longer did you have the simple traffic exchange inefficiency of network traffic moving between two local providers going outside of the country only to be brought back in. You had these additional concerns, security concerns, business continuity concerns that made it all the more imperative to move toward it. And so between the actions of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, the CTU, through the Caribbean ICT Roadshow, Packet Clearinghouse, through a number of Caribbean Internet Exchange Point symposia, and just the hard work of individuals on the ground who had an interest in seeing a stronger, more robust local environment, we found that we got good momentum in establishing exchanges. So we now have exchange points in 8 English-speaking Caribbean countries, or 8 Caribbean territories, actually. British Virgin Islands, Curacao, Dominica, Haiti, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Martin, and most recently, congratulations, Trinidad and Tobago has officially announced the start of its exchange point with the connectivity of one of the largest ISPs just recently. And so we have this checkbox now. So we have the exchanges. There is local traffic. That has been the revelation in every single market, from the smallest territories, BVI and Grenada, to the larger markets. There is local traffic to exchange, contrary to the statements of those who believed otherwise. There is a significant amount of local traffic to exchange. And this is even without doing any further promotional work. So from Grenada, from day one, I think we saw the graphs going up and up as just basic chatter between the two local networks started to pass over the exchange point. In the case of Curacao, there is actually a peering coordinator whose job is to go out and find content providers and bring them into Curacao to make sure that that exchange point is giving them their money's worth for what has been a very significant investment. There are now more local traffic routes available, which is one of the benefits of the exchange point. It allows for service providers to find shorter pathways between competitor networks and other content provider networks. But there are 2 boxes that are also part of the IXP promise that are still to be checked off. And that's why I want to leave us with this conversation. One box is more local innovation. IXPs have had the promise of being a hub for the local ICT sector, a hub for technology-based and internet-based innovation. It's also been touted as a place where you can encourage more local content, more local digital content, people writing local apps to meet local needs and solve local problems. And in theory, that is so. The problem is this. The ISPs, the internet service providers, once they start peering, their benefit is largely done. The network efficiency that is obtained by peering happens once they agree to connect at the switch and that traffic starts to move about. The issue of building the local internet economy is somebody else's problem. And that's where most of the exchange points in the region are right now. We have this base level of inter-network traffic passing over local switches, but we're still waiting on the promise of a larger, more exciting, more competitive landscape as it relates to local content and local services. And so the place where this conversation rests right now, the punctuation mark is how do we switch from local peering to local content? How do we move from local traffic exchange to local digital content development? Who is going to be responsible for that? The regulators across the region have played a significant job in pushing the internet exchange point process forward. And this is actually in contradiction to what happens in most jurisdictions. In most jurisdictions, regulators are told, keep away. This is a private sector ISP-led initiative. In the Caribbean, the ISPs have all, in every case without exception, said, we are not going to proceed unless our regulators are here to referee and moderate the process. And so we have this interesting juncture where we have the switches, we have the traffic exchanging, we have the IXPs, and now we're looking for the next level, which is, where's the content? Where's the local innovation? Where are these hubs of IT innovation and excellence? And the answer to that comes from a different place than the place that was used to start and establish the exchange points. And so I want to leave us with this list of what comes next. We have the exchange points, but now we have to look very seriously at the issue of what is local network resilience. To the exchange points have to be attached other kinds of equipment, from routing, from root servers to DNS caches to content caches to help create a stronger local network or a stronger local internet that then attaches itself to the global internet. To the local peering has to also come the network applications, the things that run upon the local networks, that targeting local consumers, that take advantage of the broadband or bandwidth that is available across the local exchange. You may have heard, or some people refer to IXPs as bandwidth factories, and that's essentially because at the exchange point, the bandwidth cap is limited only by the size and capacity of the switch being used, which means that for local traffic, you can run a bunch of high bandwidth applications over that exchange without having to consider things like how expensive is my international transit? Do I need to block voice over IP services if they're targeting local audiences? Do I need to stop video on demand services if they have no bearing on my expensive international pipes? These are applications waiting to be built that can take advantage of the local exchange, and those applications have to be deployed. And then the final one is local digital content and services, encouraging the young innovators, encouraging the entrepreneurs, encouraging the businesses to take advantage of a facility that is not exactly at the top of anybody's development list. And IX is not going to make headlines anytime soon as a wonderful, sexy thing to have. But once it's present, once it's available in a local market, it presents an opportunity that has to be seized. Yeah.
It didn't show.
Oh, it didn't show?
The points. Yeah.
Right, so here are the three things. Resilience, applications, local content and services. And that's where we are. We're at the point where these things now need to be championed, where they need to be actioned, and where they need to be implemented at pace. Thanks.
Before we move on with Kurleigh Prescod, I think, I'm not sure if I should say this, but given that Bevil has been promoting IXPs in the Caribbean for such a long time, and I think not having an IXP in Trinidad and Tobago, I think this has caused him some pain because as a son of the soil, I mean, I'm sure he would have seen some IXP in Trinidad and Tobago as well. So that's why we're very happy to have an IXP in Trinidad and Tobago today. And Kurleigh Prescod, so he's going to explain to us what they have been doing and with respect to this local IXP. So congrats to Kurleigh Prescod, but also to Bevil Wooding, who has been proclaiming this IXP gospel in the whole Caribbean. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, all. My pleasure to have this opportunity just to present an overview of the development and creation of the Trinidad and Tobago Internet Exchange Point. So the agenda for today, very quickly, we'll just give a kind of history of where did this journey start and how did we get to where we are today. We'll talk about the governance. Jean mentioned that when she spoke about how IXPs are created and the steps, how they mature. So we'll talk about the current governance structure that oversees TTIX. We'll also look, just do a quick overview of the actual infrastructure, the members who are connected, that sort of thing. We'll do a quick look at statistics, and then we'll talk about sort of the next steps. So the history, interestingly enough, the first real mention of the development of an internet exchange point in the context of Trinidad and Tobago was actually first mentioned in a consultative document that was published at the time, the Ministry of Public Administration and Information, on internet bandwidth management. So they actually released a public consultation document. And what's interesting was that it was a document that I would say was somewhat ahead of its time because there was no real competition in the broadband space. I mean, there was competition. Dial-up was the main platform for delivering of internet access. There were the very, very small dial-up ISPs, and then, of course, the TSTT being the major internet service provider. And DSL was now starting to emerge. Columbus Communications, we didn't really have much a significant presence in the internet space. Digicel was probably still awaiting interconnection. So it was a sort of a very interesting thing that the government of Trinidad and Tobago actually published this document and speaking to the possible benefits of the formation of an IXP. And at the time, it really wasn't taken as a sort of a big, this is something that needs to be done. But what we've seen over the years, as competition has emerged, as telecom infrastructure has happened, the relevance and need for this IXP, it's certainly evolved and emerged accordingly. So subsequent to that 2006 consultative document, there was a IXP symposium that was coordinated by the Caribbean Telecom Union in conjunction with Packet Clearinghouse. Again, as a sort of another effort, with the broadband space, as well as I should say the internet space, now evolved to some extent. There was some level of competition. There was a significant penetration of broadband. More than 50% of customers at that time had broadband. The CTU and Packet Clearinghouse, they, in conjunction with obviously TAT and the other ISPs, sort of held this forum to talk about, what are the possible benefits, how can the country be served by the formation of an IXP. And in that forum, while there were a lot of expressions of, yes, this thing would have benefits, and yes, this thing does make sense, coming out of that particular forum, there really wasn't not much effort galvanized towards, creation of it. There wasn't really champions identified. And I guess at that time, still the commercial benefit and the economic benefit, everything wasn't that compelling at the time. So while the seed was planted, or I could say the seed that was already planted was watered a bit, we still didn't have that nourishing plant that really started the mobilization towards the creation of an IXP coming out of that forum. So then I would say probably around 2011, 2012, this is when, with the formation or the revision of the National ICT Plan, because of course there was fast forward back in 2004-05. So when that plan was sort of being reevaluated, and there were attempts by the government to sort of modernize that plan, and they were looking for the relevant components that needed to be inculcated in the next version of the country's ICT plan. Again, the whole notion of IXP came up. And coming out of those efforts, TAT was sort of identified as an agency that needed to sort of take the lead and work with the relevant internet service providers, being those ISPs being concessionaires of TAT, to see how they can really mobilize this effort and really get this IXP into fruition. And coming around that time, coming back to Bevil's point, IXP started to spring up across the region. By that time, St. Martin would have already had its IXP. Curacao would have had its. Probably around Grenada, because I was in Grenada at the time of the Grenada IXP, so that was 2011. So again, the notion of these IXPs was starting to spring up, British Virgin Islands. So there was an observation and a recognition that this thing was happening, and that if Trinidad didn't really start to move, they potentially could have been left behind. So TAT sort of took the lead. They started to engage the relevant ISPs. In terms of getting their buy-in, their agreement, their consensus around, contributing and participating in the formation of the Internet Exchange Point. And they also took lead again on a number of the administrative items. I think one of the first decisions that had to be made was whether or not the ISPs can just work together in a sort of an informal association, or if something formal had to be established. I think one of the first decisions that came out of the operators was, let's do it formal, let's do it proper, let's don't leave it to good faith. And Jean also talked about trust, so I guess that speaks to how much trust the ISPs had, right? But that then, getting that feedback back from the ISPs, they took the lead, then they sort of, once they got the consensus and agreement from the operators, they sort of worked on the incorporation of a non-profit company, the consent by the operators to be members of that non-profit company, and sort of started the ball in motion. So I think, identify potential hosting locations and that sort of stuff. And I actually identified, again, with the agreement of the operators, a potential hosting location for the IXP. So that work would have sort of happened in the 2012-2013 timeframe. Once, and TAT also took the opportunity to draft bylaws as well. So, once the non-profit company was formed, they had a lot of draft material that they could have used to move forward. It wasn't a case where they had to start from scratch. They had bylaws to be reviewed and discussed. There was a hosting agreement from a potential hosting provider, data center provider, to look at and identify whether that was the way they wanted to go forward. And of course, as I said, the company was incorporated, documents filed, and so on. So there was some foundation which the TTIX could build upon. So once that company was incorporated, the first steps were for representatives to be identified by each ISP, which would form the board of the Trinidad and Tobago IX. Once those representatives were identified, the first board meeting of the TTIX was called or convened in November of last year. So we just within under a year since the TTIX was formed. And at that first board meeting, obviously, there was, elections in terms of who would sort of be the chair. And I think the secretary was already volunteered by Digicel at the time. So with that, there were sort of certain responsibilities and rules that were identified by the various ISPs as to what needed to be done to get this IXP up and running. So having that first board meeting convened in November, we were able to sort of conclude the hosting agreement with Fujitsu, who is the party that hosts the IXP. And by May of this year, we were actually able to have the IXP switch up and running. The first 2 members connected to that IXP, and those ISPs actually pairing and exchanging traffic across that IXP. I guess some may ask, well, if 2 ISPs were paired since May, why didn't the TTIX announce at that time that, hey, the IXP is up? And what we felt is, given that there were sort of 7 active members to the TTIX, we felt, just 2 of the 7 members really wasn't that sort of significant footprint we wanted to have to sort of go to the public saying the IXP is ready. So we sort of tried to encourage the remaining members to join. And we are up to 5 members connecting to that IXP as of October 2014. So from a governance perspective, as I mentioned, TTIX is a non-profit company. We're fully incorporated. And of course, with that, we have the administrative overhead that comes with incorporation in terms of filing annual returns and preparing audited financial statements and all that sort of good stuff. As I also indicated, it comprises 7 ISP members, and referring back to Annie's presentation, she talked about there being 8 actual ISPs. So 7 of those 8 are actual formal members of the TTIX. The 8th I could actually comment on. They're Airlink. They're a niche ISP. However, they actually have expressed interest. Now that they're aware that this IXP is being formed, they have signaled to the TTIX that they would also like to become a member as well. So we'll see where that goes. But the 7 current members are listed there, and you would see that it comprises the more predominant ISPs, the TSTTs, the Flows, the Digicels, as well as the other, sort of smaller corporate focused ISPs like Lisa Communications, Massey Communications, formerly 360, Open Telecom, and Green Dot is also a residential focused ISP as well. As I said, each member has 1 representative on the board. In terms of operational decisions, how we make decisions, that is actually stipulated in the bylaws, which all members are signed on to. And in general, for non-financial matters, decisions are made by majority. So once there are a majority of members at a board meeting where there's a quorum, and a majority decides on a particular item that does not have a financial impact, then the majority holds sway. But in the case of a financial matter, there must be unanimous consent to spending any money, effectively. The last point there being that, of course, any cost that all members agree to incur, in general, it's shared equally. Of course, if there's a particular cost that one particular member would benefit from and they're asking for it, they would cover those costs. But in general, if there's a shared cost that have to be spent, for example, the registration of the ix.tt domain, those costs are shared equally among members. So in terms of just a technical overview of the TTIX, it's hosted at the Fujitsu data center. Right here in Barataria, so it's actually about 3 minutes drive away. I took Christian there yesterday. The rack space was actually provided by Fujitsu gratis for a period of 4 years, so we're very appreciative Fujitsu for that very, very generous offer. And they've also provided the switch as well, the initial switch, which provides up to 12 connections or 12 connecting devices, up to a maximum speed of 1 gigabit per second. They provide that switch. Again, those costs were waived to TTIX. So Fujitsu has made a very significant contribution to the creation and formulation of the TTIX. Each ISP covers its own cost to connect to the IXP, including the very optic in that switch. The connectivity options are, it's generally Ethernet, 1 gig, but you can connect either via optical connections or fiber. RJ45, electrical connectivity. The current form of pairing is bilateral, meaning just by connecting to the IXP, you aren't automatically paired with everyone else. Each pair of ISPs do have to agree to pair with each other. And while pairing is encouraged, it's not mandatory. All right? So what that means is, for example, if two ISPs have a pending boon, right, prior to the whole TTIX, it may mean they may say, listen, you know what, you and I, we're not on good terms, we ain't pairing. But the other members who obviously have no issues among each other, they are free to pair as they wish. As I said, 5 members, up to last month, we had 5 members connected. And we've actually created our website, IXDT. It's been up since January of this year. And on our site, we have a lot of information in terms of the members, our autonomous system numbers, our pairing guidelines, and even statistics on the traffic passed across the IXP. All right, I'll spend 10 seconds on this. So these are just some sample graphs of traffic from the IXP switch to various members. And as time goes by, we'll collate, aggregate graphs and all that sort of good stuff, especially as more and more members connect and more members pair. So our next steps. So as I said, we only have 5 of the 7 connected. So we're working with our data center provider to have the remaining two ISPs connected. Both those ISPs are connecting via wireless means. And they're just basically awaiting approval from the data center to attach them as a data center. So we're hopeful that those wireless connections to the IXP could be completed by the end of October, worst case November. The other thing we actually started working on is we were working with Packet Clearinghouse at this time to the potential installation of a root server by the end of the year. We've also been approached by LAC and ISC as well to install an FRoot server. So there are discussions ongoing in that regard. But the current effort that's a little further progressed would be the arrangement with Packet Clearinghouse, where we have a formal MOU, and we're hoping to have that executed very shortly and install a root server, which will allow us to do in-country DNS resolutions to improve the overall performance of the internet and the internet experience to consumers once installed and activated. And our time frame for that is the end of 2014. Bevil also talked about some other benefits is the local hosting of content. So one of the things that the IXP would allow is for, in particular for the smaller ISPs who are unable to, based upon their size, to attract content delivery network operators, CDN operators, such as the Googles and the Akamais and Netflixes and so on. By aggregating their subscriber numbers and their traffic needs, they're able to demonstrate and to justify and attract local content servers to be hosted here in Trinidad, which again would improve the performance of their internet services as well as reduce their costs because they no longer have to pay for transit to get that content. They can access it through a local cache and just provide a small link to that cache, which is a magnitude of less than 20% of the traffic served from that caching server. So that is definitely on the cards for 2015 to see how many content providers the TTIX can attract. And I got a challenge from Brent yesterday about getting IPv6 pairing over the IXP. So Brent, one step at a time, we're just getting the IPv4 pairing connections up. But rest assured, the IPv6 pairing connections will be placed on the agenda, and we could definitely look at it for 2015. And that is more or less it from the TTIX.
Thank you, Kurleigh. Before I open the floor to the audience, I would like to ask Kurleigh a question. You did mention that ISPs, international providers, they are free to pair with whom they want.
Yes.
So what would be the benefit of an IXP if you have like the main players in a given country say, okay, we don't want to pair with each other? Mm-hmm. Do you still think that would be beneficial of having an IXP in that particular country?
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at my next step slide, when you talk about the caching servers and you talk about the root servers and so on, there still is that benefit, right? So if I, as an ISP, in my interest, want to improve the performance of my DNS resolution, right, and there's a root server installed here at my IXP, then definitely I should get access to it and utilize it for my DNS resolutions, right? I mean, I could be lazy and allow my competitors to utilize the DNS servers, and while I'm taking 1 second to resolve DNS names, they're taking, by the time you finish, you press enter after you type the name, the pages load. So there still are ancillary benefits to installation of the IXP. The other thing is, I mean, again, and this kicks off Bevil's point, if it is that local applications and servers are being built, so let's say governments, and government has obviously is pushing its plans to roll out e-government to the general public. Pay taxes online, register, get information on company registry or deeds or whatever as the case. And that's hosted, with one particular ISP, or maybe two, let's just say. Again, it would be, I don't see it being to your interest to say that you're not going to appear over the IXP when you could establish a very low latency, almost free link to that content, right? So I see multiple benefits. Even if two particular ISPs feel that they don't need to pay, there still are multiple benefits from being a member of the IXP.
Okay,
so thanks for giving me that opportunity to make that plug, Shannon.
Yes, thank you. A question for Christian O'Flaherty. Basically, what we're trying to achieve, and Bevil has been addressing that before, it's not about just to install IXPs. We'd like to have like an internet, we would like to spur an internet economy. So I would like to hear from Christian, what has been the experience, for example, in Latin America, once we have seen all these IXPs deployments going on?
Thanks for the question, because what I said is that we want to create the conditions. We want to make the community to agree on having an IX. And there are cases where that not happens easily. And in some of those cases, the government that really knows about the benefits and shared experiences with other governments and they are convinced that they should have an IX in their countries, try to impose and try to rule or try to push much on the service providers to create the IX. And those are usually not success cases. So creating the conditions and convincing them that it's worth the effort and it's going to benefit not just their businesses but also their customers, and also creates the conditions for all the additional steps, as Bevil said, that whenever you have a hub in your country, a single location where you can reach all the users on the country, that enables a lot of businesses and services and CDNs. CDNs are content delivery networks. Those are global companies that manage more than 50% of the internet traffic nowadays. They are going to be very interested on having a single location where they can push all their content very easily. So, but all of those conditions can only happen if the community agreed on having the IX. If they are pushed to interconnect or they are pushed to create the IX, those conditions are not going to work the same way. And we know about cases in our region that are struggling on making the IX successful because they have pushed too much. So Trinidad and Tobago is a perfect example of patience. So yes, because it could have been ruled in the past and it would not be a success case as it is nowadays.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Jane, and then I'll be asking Bevil a question as well. Jane, we know that you have been working globally with all these internet server providers trying to deploy IXPs, and we know that you're very active with respect to an IXP toolkit. So what would you say is the main challenge that you're facing right now working with all these IXPs organizations globally?
I think the main challenge, and I would reiterate what Christian is saying, is growing the local environment first. building that sustainability and that community of interest and not coming in top-down and forcing it. You've seen a good situation here. I was in Montenegro last week, which is a very small country, highly mountainous country, has about 600,000 people. They are considering an IXP, and the government and the university have come in with a proposal that was technologically curious because it was what's called layer 3, which is not a switch. It couldn't have switching fabric, but the bottom line is you're looking at a layer 2 switching fabric for IXPs, and we sat down with them, and so it's presupposing conditions, as Christian said, and Bevil mentioned that you don't want to presuppose what your IXP should be until you've had good chats within the community, and it often is just some of the technical technical people from the ISPs and other networks coming together just to chat about what they can do, and after that moves and there's some momentum, it's the champions that push it forward. One thing I would also say is that, and this is a pitch for colleagues who are going to the Plenty Pot, I was talking to Chris about this yesterday, to come in from a global level and try and regulate internet exchange points is not a good idea, in our opinion, because that would mean that they're trying to standardize IXP configuration and IXP deployment. It's different for every country. You know your country better than we do. And when we come in, we always work with the local partners to say what works best. Because it's not for us to come in and say, it should be like this for you. It was different for Brent in Grenada. We've been chatting with him and working with him and with Bevil and others, and Christian's been doing amazing work. Things can fall apart on you after a while, and you have to build it back up. And you just have to have those contacts and stay with it, because that's part of the staying power of your work.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question for Bevil. One of the things that I've heard is mostly people are saying once we have an IXP in a given country, we become like attractive for all these Google, Akamai's, Netflix, you know. Do we have some examples where this really happened, that we finally became attractive, if I can use that word, to all these big content providers?
I'll have to phrase it a little differently. It's not an automatic attraction.
Right.
I will give this reference using Grenada, which Kurleigh will also be familiar with. When we got the Grenada Internet Exchange Point up and running, at that time Akamai said they were not interested in small Caribbean markets. They were too small. They didn't believe that they had the content. But we were able, because we had the IX active, to sit down and have an intelligent conversation around the growing nature of the Caribbean as an emerging market region, and the unique consumption patterns inside of the small territories, which of course they're not consistent with what you would think the population sizes would give you. And so you have cases where Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, small territories relative to US and European market sizes, have these huge appetites for content services. Netflix is one of the largest bandwidth consumers of Caribbean internet traffic. Facebook and YouTube statistics have us disproportionately large relative to population sizes. And so we're able to sit down with the statistics and have a conversation around why would it make sense for an Akamai to locate itself in a Grenada market. Since that time, that would have been 2010, 11, Akamai has now been looking out for the list of announcements of Caribbean exchange points, and they've actually developed a package for Caribbean markets. It's not the same package that you would get, or the same promotional product or service that they would offer, for example, in larger markets like New York or Amsterdam or London. But it's relevant to the Caribbean. And it means that Caribbean exchanges, once they're established, have the benefit and opportunity to have an Akamai cache. And for those who don't know, this essentially brings content like Yahoo, a number of the streaming services like Hulu and Facebook and so on, to a local market, which means that users in those markets can get a tangibly or discernibly different experience when accessing content. Remember what I said at the start, an IX is not something you're going to walk down the street and say, hey, Trinidad and Tobago has an exchange point. But you can walk down the street and say, hey, we have a better internet service. Somehow things seem to be moving faster. Somehow videos seem to be loading more quickly. Somehow the peer-to-peer file sharing that we're doing is coming up faster. And that conversation shift touches consumers in a very real way. So to answer the question, is it automatically attractive? No. but does it open the door for a whole new set of conversations to large content providers, not just internationally, but even opportunities for content providers to emerge locally? Yes, it absolutely does.
Okay, thank you, Bevil. So I would like to open now the floor, and there will be possibility for us to ask questions.
Just a quick question from online. Are these being built in El Salvador? Exchange point, sorry.
There's one that it's about to be launched. Yes, so there are no yet providers exchanging traffic there, but the location, the equipment, and the initial steps were taken, like getting a root server for El Salvador. So I would say they are in their initial steps.
Gerard first, then Claire, and then Simon.
Another quick question for Kurleigh. Could you tell us some more about that process that you alluded to? I think the term you used was a pending bone. What were some of the difficulties or challenges that would have accounted for the quite lengthy delay in the establishment and launch of the TTIX?
Well, I mean, in the nature of these things, it's just a case of every operator and every country would have to go through their relevant processes. I think one of the things that would probably contribute would be the quantum of players, right? So you have a quantum of players, and really you're trying your best to seek a consensus view. And obviously, because each different player would have a different position in the market, a consensus view tends to be to obtain a consensus view in many of the discussions and negotiations, tends to be a process of identifying that middle road that we're all happy. Because even though something may seem to be to the majority, of all, if there's one person who in his particular market situation may say, you know what, this particular direction is not the way we want to go, then obviously that could steer everything off course. So obviously, in general, I think one of the areas that would have, I guess, contributed and forged the time it would have taken to get us to where we are today, would be just sort of getting those consensus positions across the various members and the important stakeholders like TAT, to ensure that we're all happy with the direction in which this is going. In terms of the IXP sort of being up and the time it took from the IXP being up to the day when we could actually announce that the IXP is up, I would really just say it's just a case of logistics. I mean, the reality is we didn't do the IXP in a sort of ad hoc manner. The partner we're working with, Fujitsu, they're a formal data center with formal procedures. So it's not just a case of, run your fiber in the building and connect to IXP, right? There's approvals, there's ducting, So it's just a case of going through the relevant, I guess, semantics involved in establishing a service provider grade connection to what would be a piece of carrier grade infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay, Claire.
Okay, this could be to any member of the panel. We have heard about all the benefits to having an IXP in a country. Are there any obvious disadvantages, particularly for a large ISP to join in an IXP? And the second question, particularly for Trinidad, is were there any other stakeholders besides TAT and the ISPs who were responsible for helping to bring this on board?
I guess I'll take the last one, right? In terms of other stakeholders. So I guess I could start off by apologizing profusely to anyone I forget. But as I mentioned, Fujitsu was a very important stakeholder in terms of their contribution. Obviously, the Ministry of Science and Technology, because I said, I said it diplomatically that TAT was mandated. Obviously, somebody mandated TAT, right? So the Ministry of Science and Technology and IGov, they of course were important stakeholders that had an interest in the establishment of the IXP. Obviously, I mentioned, Packet Clearinghouse and CTU holding that initial symposium. And I mean, and Bevil and I, we've met when the Grenada IXP was being formulated. And obviously, during that time, I would have had interactions with Bevil, with other members of the CTU, like the Secretary General, Ms. Bernadette Lewis, and so on. So I think, they CTU, Packet Clearinghouse, they were all persons and entities and agencies that had interest, that did contribute, that did offer support over time, that would have allowed us to reach the point where we are today, to the formulation of the TTIX. All right, and as I said, I apologize profusely. There's some stakeholder that I may not have been aware about, who I've forgotten. I think the first point you talked about is disadvantage, just a larger ISP. I could probably take a swing at it. If you look at it from an individualistic perspective, I guess you could say, I'm making things easier for my competition to some extent. Right. Because rather than having to buy traffic to my network, they could get it for free by connecting to me. You could take a look at it that way. That I think is a very short-sighted view, because the reality is, in the long run, as technology evolves, what you would find yourself doing is really, cutting off your nose to spite your, that your face kind of thing, So I think you have to kind of look at the pros versus the cons, and I think in the long run you would realize that as to the overall development of the internet sector, you're going to benefit. So if you look at it as by supporting something, and I guess I could speak as a large ISP, right? I think if you look at it as the overall internet sector being developed and therefore consumers growing, usage growing, that just means, benefits to us. Then I don't think that taking the short-sighted view of, okay, fine, this means that this small ISP gets sort of free bandwidth to me or whatever, that really doesn't sustain over the long haul. So it may be a short-sighted view, but in the long term, it really doesn't pan out.
And just to add to that, I would just say that if you don't want to give your consumers better options, then sure, you don't have to interconnect. But the other thing is the London Exchange Point, which now has over 400 networks interconnecting in one space, started off with donated equipment and 5 internet service providers connecting. So they started off small and they grew. They have 400 networks coming in. It's the largest players in the world. It's to everyone's advantage because they can exchange traffic and they can also do other deals on services dependent upon the rules at the Internet Exchange Point. So as Bevil has said earlier, you start off at a certain point and then you start to layer on the functionality, the services, and the value add. And that's important, and we've seen that with Brazil. It's about, as Christian mentioned, Sao Paulo is huge. It's a massive IX, and the Brazilian government is behind the Brazilian IX system. And so it's been fascinating to watch. Also Argentina, where Christian and Sebastian both had a role. That's important to see that it's provided better services. The chairman of Cabase, which is the IX system in Argentina, was telling us that just the idea that they'd bring in a POP has dropped prices from $400 a megabit per second down to about $100. In Ecuador, they were paying $100 per megabit per second for international transit. With the IX in Quito, it went down to $1 per megabit per second. Huge. If you're trying to provide better services, cheaper, faster, and you're bringing in content to your country, Google will come, and Akamai, you can negotiate with them. A lot of IXs have done this. We were in Armenia last year, and there were 3 caches, Google caches, that were not in the IX. As soon as they saw more momentum, the environment developing, the importance of the role of the IXP, they're peering now at the IX. They've got their cache there. And as the guys have all said, you increase your local resiliency in your market, the infrastructure, the fabric, and the DNS infrastructure also increases. So you see, as a consumer, some of the upload speeds increase. So it takes some time, but it's definitely something that will happen. And I don't know why you wouldn't want to peer. In South Africa, the incumbent is not peering. They've had an IXP for 16 years. It's okay. It's just fine. And they work quite well. They have 3 IXPs. But I will say this, the cost of fiber, terrestrial fiber, is so high because that hasn't been regulated well. They're sending traffic through subcables from Johannesburg to Cape Town. to the IXs and back and forth because it's easier. So that's what we were talking about with the enabling environment. That's where the great role that TAC can play with the environment here, looking at interconnection, how to facilitate more content, talking to people. It's critical.
Okay, thank you. Simon?
More statements and questions. The first one, or the first two to Kurleigh, and then the third to Bevil. Kurleigh have been running trace routes during the presentation, and I see that TSTT still hasn't come up. So hopefully that will happen pretty soon. The second statement is I kind of just wanted to, I just wanted to make a little addition to the historical record. We did in fact have an IXP in Trinidad and Tobago in the, let's say, 1995. We didn't call it an IXP, but that's basically the time that TSTT connected, internationally. And all the smaller ISPs connected to TSTT. So assuming that the routing was set up properly, there would have been local exchanges.
I refute that because a lot of the smaller ISPs were using VSAT.
No. Well, hold on.
Yeah?
Since I was a general manager of 3 of them, I can refute your refutation. We all connected to TSTT for the first couple of months.
Right.
But the cost of getting more bandwidth from TSTT basically forced us to go to VSAT about a year later.
Yeah.
But we all still had the local connection to TSTT. Okay? I was in the right place at the right time. So maybe if you can update your slides. We had an IXP, it wasn't called an IXP.
I want to repeat it more, but limited time.
And to Bevil, I think Bevil was alluding to me as one of the naysayers about some of the benefits of IXPs. I don't know if there's anybody else. So I'm assuming it's me. But I always think you have to let the data speak. So what I've been doing is a natural experiment starting in June, because it was my understanding that IXP was supposed to kind of come up in about July. So we were doing before and after. So we've been running thousands of trace routes through June, August. Then we kind of stopped, and we're basically waiting for TSTT, because it really comes down to Flow and TSTT as the 2 800-pound gorillas. So once TSTT comes up, we will resume again, and then we will be happy to share the data somewhere down at the end of the year.
Okay, I would like to give the presenters like a few seconds to say some last comments, and then we can close this session. Sorry, before I proceed, are there other questions?
Yeah, online.
No, before I go to online. So let me just take Brent. So I'll be giving you the opportunity to ask 2 more questions because we need to, it's very important, but we need to move on. So Brent, and then if there is any other persons here, we will give him or her the opportunity, and then we will look online what is there.
Right. Thanks, Brent McIntosh. Just a quick comment and one small short question. Jane, very important, as you mentioned, the reduction of the average public delivery cost for IP transit. For end users and my interaction with end users, the first thing they think about, great, that's going to be reduced. So how is the ISPs going to pass on that savings to us? Are they going to drop their pricing in the internet packages? And that's why I think moving to IXP common services like caching, route service, looking glasses, all the things they can benefit from, the community, should be top priority on your list. All right, so that shifts that discussion away from their minds. And my question was, the definition from EPNIC on what constitutes a real IXP is having 3 members as the minimum requirement. In the case of Grenada, where we have 2, and it's a challenge to get, the other provider.
So wait, can I? Yeah, sorry, keep going.
3. So is that an agreed standard? Because the whole discussion was, why should we give a /24 to only 2 hosts, right? That's wasting IP resources, and that was a discussion I think on LAC-NOG.
Yeah.
So what are your views on that?
So this is a really great question because the same question has come up in Vanuatu, which is an island in the Pacific. there were two providers who were willing to interconnect at that time and providing service. Philip Smith, who many of you know, who worked at APNIC, he's one of the key BGP experts in the World Border Gateway Protocol for running traffic. Philip and I had this conversation, and quite frankly, in island economies, it's different. You're going to want to interconnect to increase your traffic, to help provide better services, to do what you can. I would say that we need to figure out a way to look at where you are versus saying just because usually it's 3, right, in a bigger economy. But when you do have an island country and you're starting off, now Vanuatu has 4. There are mobile providers coming in. There's a O3, which is a new satellite system, and there's different connectivity. But I think that they're looking at also the switching fabric definition. And EuroIX is coming out with a definition that they're going to try and take into the IETF. So that's something to look out for too. And we work really closely with them, and we can talk to them. And Christian has good contacts through the IX Federation. But it's a good point. I think you have to take a look at the local environment, and we may have to revise that definition.
Yes, I would like to answer the first part or the first question, which was what was related with the savings on end users. And yes, of course, end users are not going to pay less. and in the case that Jane mentioned in Argentina, the reduction in costs was amazing, from more than $500 to less than 100. So it has been reduced their income in less than a half of what they were having before. So what they did was to increase the bandwidth to end users for the same price 10 times, not just 5, because as they were having additional benefits, CDNs were there, Google was there, so they were able to remove the caps on certain services, such as YouTube and services like that. So what it used to be like a half a meg connection, it became a 10 meg connection without much advertisements. They didn't do a lot of announcements about that. Actually, two of those ISPs never recognized publicly that they removed the cap on certain services, but the end user experiences were much better. So you're right, they do not reduce the prices, but the end users get a lot of additional benefits for the same money. Yeah.
Bevil, you had a comment?
Yeah, just basically had to do with the number of participants at the exchange. That is not a commercial internet service provider number. It's a number of peers. So even in the case of Grenada, you have the 2 major commercial internet service providers. You have Packet Clearinghouse, that gives you 3. Because remember, the root services are part of the peering family inside of the GREX. And increasingly, governments are looking at also being legitimate peers at the exchange, getting an ASN, connecting to the switch, and exchanging government content. So it's important for us to understand that while we say that an IX is essentially an agreement amongst internet service providers, we are not limiting that definition to only commercial internet service providers. It is anyone with content on a network that can be attached and exchanged to other networks in the local environment. And so we're actively looking at, and both RIRs, LACNIC and ARIN, are ready and waiting to give addressing space, numbering space to additional IXP peers in the region once they ask and once they have the once they have the requirements in place. And let me just add one more technical part to that. Those requirements would have typically said that you have to be dual home though. And now they're looking at the presence at the IX as a legitimate count for dual homing. So you can have your transit provider, which is, let's say you were the University of the West Indies, and you are paying a local ISP for transit. You can now claim that the second transit point is the exchange itself and get your ASN numbers. For those of you who are tracking this, what this essentially means is that a local exchange can now grow to include a number of other content owners in the local space and have them legitimately exchange traffic with the commercial ISPs, and so create new dynamics for content exchange at a local level. Benefits, huge benefits for education, huge benefits for video and security type services, huge benefits for healthcare delivery once these things are recognized.
Okay. I would like to add something to Bevil's comment, Trinidad and Tobago belongs to LAC-NIC as the regional registry, and in LAC-NIC that policy of connecting to one transit provider and to the IXP is already in place. So you can get AS numbers from LAC-NIC if you are willing to connect to the IX. And now there's an ongoing discussion for the next public policy, which is going to happen by the end of the month in Santiago, to make it even better. So if you have plans to connect to the IX in the coming year or the coming 6 months, then, and you only have one transit provider, then you can get your own ASN resources. If that policy is approved, it's going to be even easier.
One point on that. I really want people to understand what is happening here. This is how the market matures. This is a version of technological independence taking place where people who would have been formerly customers of an commercial internet service provider for things like numbering resources, where you get your IP blocks from, can now legitimately secure their own internet numbering and use that to manage their own networks and attach those networks to commercial internet service providers and exchange traffic. There are two ways to exchange traffic. One is peering, which is the free exchange over an IX. The other is transit, which is paying a provider somewhere, local or international, to give you that traffic. When you have a case where more local providers, whether you're in the academic space or you're in the healthcare delivery or you're just government services delivery, able to create your own numbering resources, set up your own networks, and attach it to and connect to customers on other national networks, you have just created a whole new landscape for building out the local internet economy. And that ultimately is what this is all about in terms of creating that environment that allows for the growth and maturation of the local internet economy.
Okay, we have one question online and then we will be closing the session.
A question from Dale Wilson. How do we counter not only the need for local content, but local hosting, given the proliferation of cloud and the fact that the main cloud providers are international?
I think that comes back to Bevil's point, right, about the IXP being sort of a means by which we can now start to attract and move those services that were hosted internationally, to locally, right? And the IXP allows you to have a cost-effective means by which customers across any ISP could access those cloud services hosted locally. So really and truly, this is why they talk about this being an enabling infrastructure, this being the start of this journey to migrate and encourage users to start hosting those services locally. All right.
And the other part of it, which we now have to recognize, is this creates an initiation point for discussion on building out the local cloud. What's a Trinidad and Tobago cloud? Where does it live? How does it work? Up to this point, without an exchange, and in that exchange point, any conversation around the cloud must, almost by necessity, include or involve or center around a foreign cloud, a cloud located in somebody else's jurisdiction. And we all know the difference between the marketing term cloud and the reality that it is physical infrastructure in a physical space, most times in somebody else's physical foreign jurisdiction, which means all of the economic benefits of cloud businesses, cloud hosting, cloud service delivery, lives or resides in somebody else's jurisdiction. If we are considering the development of the local internet economy, then cloud services is a natural first point for situating local internet applications in the local environment and facilitating the transactions that those infrastructure and those services provide also within the local financial system. That changes, again, the conversations around what's the nature of the local internet economy, what is the role of the banks, what is the role of the financial institutions, not just the role of the IX now, but the surrounding ecosystem to enable that. So to Dale's point, the only reason that international cloud providers have played such a significant role in our understanding of the cloud is because there was no local nexus or local landing point for sharing local networks and exchanges. Now, an innovator, an entrepreneur, or a technology-centered business can say, I want to establish a hosting service. The ISPs have tried it before, it was not economical to them. But for where we are now, given both the internet penetration rate, people's comfort with cloud services, and their frustration with the current delays in accessing cloud services, particularly backup and security-related services online, it now creates an opportunity for innovators and entrepreneurs to say, we can now tackle this, locate ourselves at the exchange point and have access to the entire local market as a legitimate, commercially viable business opportunity. That's what I meant when I said we have to look differently now at what are the new level of services that are available to us, potentially, and how do we move from potential to reality.
Okay, I would like to hear the last comment from all the presenters, just 12 seconds. Starting with Kurleigh.
All right. But to Jane, I think you talked about PairingDB. Just wanted to let you know TTIX is on PairingDB. And to Mr. Fraser, you talked about the first local IXP. As Bevil just clarified, an IXP is a point where you pay for free together. So you buying IP from a local ISP is not pairing. There's other ISPs selling to other ISPs today. That doesn't fall under the whole IXP paradigm. Sure. But in general, the TTIX, it's a journey. The journey is still ongoing. So it's not a case of, even though we've announced that it's up, it doesn't mean we've stopped working. I know that's why I took a slide to dedicate it to the next steps. It's also good to know we have interested participants looking to see when our peers come up. So it keeps us on our toes as members to ensure we keep those pairing connections up and running. And we look forward to working with the overall community to expand the benefit and to grow the internet sector in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, Bevil?
Just quickly, I want to say congratulations to Kurleigh and the participants at the TTIX. I think it's a remarkable milestone in the development of the local internet economy. What's next is now the focus of attention, and I know the ISPs have their sights set on strengthening the technical infrastructure. The question now goes out to the general public, I suppose, as to who is going to take the reins of the services and applications infrastructure. I think that's a challenge that has to be met very quickly for us to realize the true benefits of the local exchange point.
Thank you. Christian?
Well, I would like to stress the need for the local community. As we saw yesterday on many issues on the internet, the need for the community to get involved, it's fundamental to fix. And IXPs are another example. If the community is not involved and you do not agree among all the service providers and the people and the technical, those that operate the networks, then it's not going to work well. So I encourage you to work on the internet community. That would include technical people, those that are active on the IXP, but also technical people within the service providers, content providers, and everyone, to create like a network operators group or something that can be the focus and can be the leading voice of the internet issues in the island. There's also a regional network operator group. It's going to meet by the end of this month, in October, in Santiago, in Chile. So you can also cooperate with the regional groups and see and gather experiences among those groups. So that will be the next step also for the community in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Christian. Jane?
I would just add on to what Christian is saying, but first thank everyone here. It's great to hear so much about what's going on, but encourage you to have a peering day. Talk to Bevil, talk to Christian, join up with the peering activities at LAC-NOG and Caribnog and other entities. We've seen the development of IX associations around the region get involved. AFIX held a one-day workshop in Senegal in August. Now they're going to do 2 days. These IXPs can help trigger more technical training in country, whether it's BGP, V6 deployment, and other issues. And ask us, because these guys are great experts and they're here in the region, and we can help you with fellowships and training activities.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. We will be having a coffee break, 10 minutes. Please adhere to 10 minutes so that we can proceed. Thank you.